This is more a research that I'm actually doing, that I'm working on right now about Emirati youth. So it's called Never Kafi, which actually means enough in Arabic, but also it kind of sounds like coffee. Because my research is actually about coffee culture in the Middle East, or in Abu Dhabi to be specific. So it's called Understanding Never Kafi, Understanding Emirati Youth Subculture Development in Abu Dhabi Specialty Cafés. So ever since high school, cafes have played an intrinsic part in my studies, given that I particularly enjoyed spending time like working in cafes. Maybe it's the music, the white noise, the smell. I don't know what it was. It just made me feel more comfortable being in a cafe, just studying there, doing whatever I needed to do. But that really wasn't the case in Abu Dhabi. Because, recently I've noticed a significant increase of number of specialty cafes in Abu Dhabi. But the reason why I didn't feel particularly comfortable in this space was because it felt like I was the only non-local in the surroundings. So whenever I go in, I could kind of see like the gaze following my movement. And that was because everyone that I saw in that space always wore like a kandura or like an abaya, and then there was just me, who stands out because, not only I'm a foreigner, I'm East Asian, and you don't see a lot of East Asian in Abu Dhabi. So, but obviously, like as a Korean living in the UAE, isn't that what I should be expecting? But not particularly in the UAE, because UAE is a country where locals constitute a minority of the population. So Abu Dhabi is actually a city where Emiratis negotiate their urban space with the expats, yet contemporary cafes seem to be a location that is occupied mostly by young Emiratis. And living in Abu Dhabi for 3 years, I have not seen any public locations that are as concentrated as young Emiratis as specialty cafes. Well, yes, there's malls, but then that's also for families, right? And the fact that specialty cafes' main customers were Emiratis, and that, like considering the diversity of the population, and the cafe has set up a trend amongst young Emiratis, I found very fascinating. Moreover, young Emirati entrepreneurs are the ones opening these cafes. And then it made me wonder, how did this market end up with Emirati owners? And did they specifically try to cater to an Emirati market? And most importantly, what is it about specialty cafe that attract young Emirati customers? So how do I define specialty cafe? So the main defining trait of specialty cafe is that it is not corporate owned. Beginning as a small business, the owner of the cafe claims to take part in making of the cafe, from selecting the beans all the way to decorating the cafe itself. So this is actually a picture that I took from Parallel Cafe. I don't know if you guys have been in it. So according to UAE Air's press champion barista from Blacksmith, the development of specialty cafe is owed not only to the taste of coffee, but also the experience and the complexity of each coffee. Quite complicated. But they pride themselves to sell high quality coffee and coffee beans compared to other franchise cafes like Starbucks. And to customers, the physical appearance of the coffee shop is a big defining quality, because customers characterize the cafes to be chill, quiet, Instagrammable, and mostly the atmosphere or the vibe is what attracts and distinguishes specialty cafes from other franchised coffee spaces. So why are specialty cafes important? Well, many of the people here might be wondering, like, cafe is just a cafe. It's just where people go to drink coffee. Like, why is it so fascinating? Well, as I've mentioned before, these cafes are trending amongst Emirati youth. And as my Emirati interviewees have described the phenomenon, I'm quoting her, in order for you to be cool, you need to be aware of the coffee. And in the Middle East, they think that drinking coffee is a personality trait. So what though? Like, aren't specialty cafes in general globally trending? But in Abu Dhabi particularly, specialty cafes are a social space that stands out. Not only these cafes attract Emirati customers, but also specialty cafes allow coexistence of men and women. This comes into contrast with many other institutions that are dedicated to young Emiratis, for instance, gender-segregated schools or sports events. Many of my interlocutors and my interviewees, who are Emirati youth who are older than 18 years old, claim that they are not to be seen interacting with the opposite gender in public space, as such actions are followed with consequences for their family. Again, like this is everything I gathered from interviews, and honestly, it might differ people by people, but this was kind of like the general idea that I received from most of my interviewees. And given the small population, my interviewees say that everyone knows each other within the Emirates and that they belong in, hence they should be cautious of who they are seen interacting with. While young Emiratis are conscious of their action in public spaces, they say that they still want to visit these specialty cafes where not only you're seen in public, but you also will coexist with the opposite gender. But the country's recent development, on the other hand, have included co-ed foreign universities such as York University Abu Dhabi, where I come from, or Sorbonne University Abu Dhabi, where you guys come from. And it is interesting to note that most of the popular cafes are actually located very close to these universities, or just universities in general, like Khalifa University, higher technology, and like for instance, Rain, parallel with Oz Cafe, they're actually located 5 minutes drive away from Khalifa University. And there's also Blacksmith right in front of New York University Abu Dhabi. I actually don't know what they have near Sorbonne. But specialty cafes are representative of certain tension in the development of the country, which make them a particularly interesting side of observation. While the emergence of specialty cafes is a global phenomenon, the ways in which this commercial space is used differ from other global cafes. Moreover, the space is designated as young people's place in the Emirates compared to other specialty cafes around the world, which have a wider range of customers. And the way that I conducted this research was through this thing called ethnography. I don't know if you guys are aware of what ethnography is, but ethnography is a common research method used in anthropology to understand the social life and culture of people. So there are actually different methods in conducting ethnography, but in my study, I chose to engage in a participatory observation, which is where I actually go to these places, I sit down and look around the surroundings and observe what I see, and actually interview the people who are present in the space. So the data that I collected, so I had in-depth and informal interviews with the owners, employees, and customers. And owners, it was helpful so that I could kind of trace the trend of this specialty cafe. And then employees to see like their experiences, and most importantly for me, the customers, who are all above 18 and they hold Emirati passports. And generally, I was just in a conversation with them about why they were here, what they liked about the space, what made it so special. But one of the limitations, well, it's true that I actually got to interview students from NYU Abu Dhabi University, which is very convenient for me. But I did, of course, interview people outside of that social circle too. But one of the limitations that I had with interviewing NYU Abu Dhabi students was that a lot of them, they actually constitute a very specific group because of their background and the place of study, and they're more distant from the dominant norms. So for example, one of the friends that I interviewed, she attended both public and private schools in UAE, so she was actually exposed to both segregated educational system, but also, I guess, the one like mixed education. But she grew up in an environment that was, compared to many other Emiratis, were a little different. So, for instance, like where gender interactions are not that common. Also, my personal connection really allowed me to get an insider perspective of how young Emiratis interact with each other and live in a society where they are constantly conscious of their behaviors. And intimate conversations were possible only because of the trust that I had established before. So this was the question that I decided to answer. how do specialty cafes contribute to self-definition of Emirati youth? So in general, in youth studies in general, scholars generally define or characterize youth to be rebellious or a polluting presence to society. Youth is made usually about what they are not or categorized as a default. Also, historically, the youth is defined by the institution that want to control or manage the youth, and scholars during the emergence of the youth studies associated youth as something negative. But I argue that that is not the case in the UAE. Because this perception, in my study, I argue that the youth define themselves and place themselves in their society by actively participating and creating themselves as a social category. So in the case of UAE, specialty cafes are one of those physical locations in which Emirati youth have selected to socialize, appropriate, and place themselves in their society. So they are actually active participants of the society rather than a default. So for instance, one of the foundings that I got, this is still a work in progress, but if I were to share one of the things that I've found out, is that a lot of the interview, especially women, they were telling me that the beauty standard that Emirati women impose on each other in specialty cafes. So compared to other public or commercialized spaces, specialty cafes are places where Emirati women feel the need to take their beauty standards to another level. So for instance, so one of my friends or one of the interviewees have told me that sometimes because of the social pressure, you always need to go to cafes to look good. You need to fit in. If you don't meet the standard of the people, they will stare at you too much, so it's too uncomfortable. And so although they prefer wearing something more comfortable, they would dress up to go to specialty cafes because if you do not meet the standard, people will stare at you too much. And another example is that the youth need to drink coffee from specialty cafes even if they do not drink in coffee. So for instance, one of the things that I got was, I prefer sugary drinks over coffee, but the only reason why they're going to these places was because of social media and their friends were going there. So like another quote was, people only go to cafes because they saw it on social media and because other people went. So instead of studying, my friends would rather go to new cafes to show it off, and it feels like it's never ending. So I feel like youth, we are always, or maybe, because I'm part of the youth too, I would say. But so I think, exactly, so I think we are always looking for something. I think it's true that like whatever is trending is very important. I think it's true that we are all living in a society where we try to follow the trend. But I think in general, I feel like youth is a very difficult social category to define, like as I've mentioned before. So like when defining youth, there is no biological explanation to indicate what youth is or what youth is not. So for instance, like here at Federal Youth Authority, they define the youth to be around 15 to 25 years old. I think 15 to 35 or 25, I believe. And also the UAE actually dedicates a lot of their project to support this population because it's one of the largest age population in the UAE. So, for instance, the Youth Hub in Abu Dhabi is a project initiated by the Federal Youth Authority, and the new bus routes going through the main international universities. And while specialty cafes are not opened by the government, the food and beverage industry is supported by the government to motivate young and Emirati entrepreneurs to start new businesses. And there is a specialty cafe inside the Youth Hub over there. I don't know if you guys have seen it, Culture, which is actually replaced, I think, every like 2 months, 2 years to actually support different young Emirati cafe owners, which I find fascinating. So I don't know, so it's still work in progress, and I kind of like wanted to end my presentation by asking you guys like what you felt about it maybe, or like how you would define the youth and what you saw about the culture or this cafe culture, if you agreed with me, if you disagreed with me. Yeah. And,
Okay.
Oh,
I mean, I have a very loud voice. I can talk without a mic. Yeah. Okay, hi. So I just wanted to say a comment before is that I have a comment and a question. So basically, the specialty coffee culture is very different in the UAE than where I come from and where I've been before. So for instance, the coffee culture in Bahrain or in Kuwait is very similar to clubs. So people don't really get to, like, it's frowned upon to go to clubs or places that sell alcohol. So specialty coffee places has a lot of like loud music, just people chilling, flirting with each other. So it's basically, you know, these specific dark, like specialty coffee places. So that's what it's like in Bahrain and Kuwait. But for the UAE, it's very different. It's very chill. The interior has a lot of like light. There are a lot of like marble and like
I'm actually gonna
natural. No, I work at NYU, so you can find me anywhere.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Great.
And then I wanted to ask you, what was it like approaching people and like approaching Emiratis in like specialty coffee places and asking them about that? What the reactions were?
I think like initially, before it really took me a while to start my interviews just because I got really scared. So I don't know. I think first coming to Abu Dhabi like as a foreigner, I think I had this like I used to have this perception of how like Emiratis were so intimidating. Like I was so scared to approach them and speak to them. And then I was like, you know what? But I have to do this. Like this is graded. Like I have to do this research. So like, khalas, like I'll just go and do it. And then they were so nice actually. Like it was really like different. And I think I kind of like reflected back on how I used to view or like Emiratis as well. And then I was like, you know, like actually they're really chill. Like they actually want to talk about it. And because of the nature of like ethnography, I did tell them that, oh, this is anonymous. Like I won't write down your name, blah blah blah. But like they were like, it's fine. Like I really don't mind. And they were very open. And I mean, there were some times where I was rejected, like they just, which was fine, but I was a little sad about it, but it was fine. But most of the times it was very successful, and I think like even some of them wanted to, they would tell me more things. Like I would just like throw like a question, and then there would be like group of people, because usually it's especially cafes are used in a social setting, so it's very easy for you to go and see like 4 to 5 people sitting together just talking and chatting. So I think like because it kind of felt like, I mean, it's not even like just about being with Emiratis, but just in general, I think even like with me, if I were with my friends in a social setting and if like a stranger approached me and like asked me to talk, I would feel weirded out in general, you know? But like, no, like they were super like chill. They actually asked me questions about my research, and they were really fascinated. Some of them actually asked me to share with them like my research after it finished. So yeah, my experiences have been very positive.
I really resonated with the second quote that you have up there, from somebody who says that, you know, we go to a new cafe and show it off. I think this whole process of showing off has become really ritualized in our lives, especially as youth, I guess. And sometimes I partake in it, you know, the whole ritual of like taking photos while your food is, you know, nice and set out prettily. Sometimes it annoys me.
Mm-hmm.
It really is a mix. And I think what's also fascinating is that all these specialty cafes know that, and they know that part, even majority of the experience, what you're paying for is just being there and existing in that space and showing it off to people. And so oftentimes you find yourself in spaces which will say, oh, like Instagram it, or like do a check-in and we'll give you a free cookie or something. Or some places will have literally like fixed, you know, booths or places or signs where you can actually take photos and post online. So I think it's just the way this whole thing has become a ritual. Even besides the idea of, you know, like hanging out with one another or eating or drinking coffee, I think is very, very fascinating. So yeah, that was interesting to read for sure.
I was actually had a question about your interviews with the people who work there. I was curious about kind of what the demographics were and also how they viewed the specialty cafe space and their place in there.
I think it was very, very diverse. So I think in general, like I've met people from the Philippines. I met people. I mean, I didn't really ask them where they were from in general, but I think my interviews were more that I could kind of look into this world of coffee. You know, this like, I guess, and then they really like. I asked them about like what made specialty cafes really different from any other cafes. And honestly, like for them, they do a lot of baristas have a lot of pride in what they're making. So, for instance, like the barista that I met at Blacksmith, he was saying how it's like a work of art, like from picking the beans to roasting it, all of that process, like they go through it together. The owners like really pick their own beans, and they're so like artisanal and like there's this like essence of what you I don't know this it's kind of like a luxury, you know, like you actually it's not something that you roast in bulk. You really need to like choose each and every like bean and really tell like what kind of like coffee tastes like this and that. And apparently there's this thing called like cupping where like you like brew all of it and you like smell it and taste it. And yeah, so he was telling me all these things, and honestly like a lot of them when you ask like the employees there or like baristas, they have so much pride in what they're selling. And I think that's also what's very different from other franchise cafes and these specialty cafes, because these baristas really know what they're doing. And I think like in general, if you go to like franchise cafes, which I've tried asking, it's very broad. Like they just say it's, oh, like it's high quality bean from like Guatemala, for instance. You know, this is like what I would hear. But like in specialty cafes, like they'll actually like go through this whole process of like picking blah 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 blah. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Jawahar. So basically, I'm curious, what kind of major are you doing this research for? Is it anthropology or which?
I'm actually doing Middle Eastern studies with Arabic minor. So basically, I guess it would fall under anthropology, if ever. But given my major, it's quite broad. So we are given a lot of freedom to choose what kind of research and what kind of method we want to do. So since choosing, I decided to do ethnography. I guess it would fall under anthropology, but my major is Middle Eastern studies.
I mean, this is really beautiful, and the question came because you can see how those different disciplines can marry each other, anthropology, and how it can benefit another discipline, which is economics or business. Because a lot of the new entrepreneurs, or let's say investors, when they wanna come and open a cafe in UAE, they struggle because there's not enough social kind of data or research that shows you why Emiratis are acting that way, since they are like majority of the consumers for specialty cafe. So I think this is a great research if you get it published for investor, and hence you're saying you was shocked because majority of the cafes owners are Emirati. Maybe it's because they find it very risky, the foreign investors, to invest in something that they're not really sure how it works. And this is, I think, when you can say, oh, this is a valuable research. I think what would be nice for your research is if you can go into the conspicuous consumption theory. It's a social economical theory. I did it like 5 years ago in university, but it was very interesting. It shows you how people relate consumption to social trends and to reflect a certain social status. So that was one of the most like useful frameworks that I can relate to when it comes to your research. Yeah.
Thank you so
talk
much.
about.
I'm just curious if you sort of like considered the opposites. So why perhaps there are Emirati youth who would not go to specialty cafes because of some specific reasons.
Oh yeah, 100%. So actually, I've only picked one part of all the research that I got, because because I didn't want to get too much into it. I mean, if you guys are interested, feel free to like message me or like meet me afterwards, because there are a lot more fascinating things than this one. But yes, there were some interviewees who didn't like to go to specialty cafes, but like they just happened to be there at the moment because they had like an appointment, so they had to kill time, so they were just there. And honestly, yes, there were Emirati or there were interviewees who were like, oh yeah, like we're just here, you know, it's the same like Starbucks. Like I think Starbucks coffee is actually better, you know. So there are always like anomalies, but it's true that like majority of them kind of had the same similar like narrative of this specialty cafe, and like we like to socialize. I don't like coffee, but you know, it's trending, so I come here. Thank you.